All right, good evening. It is now 6 p.m. on Tuesday, February 4th. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Board. The Planning Board is a 7-member board. Any special permit decision of this board requires a 2/3 vote. 2/3 of a 7-member board is 5. If only 5 members vote, the vote would have to be unanimous. Any decision on preliminary and definitive plans, approval not required, and proposed zoning amendments requires a majority vote of the full board. Any decision on scenic road permits requires a majority of the quorum present. Any person giving testimony must state and spell their name and provide their street address for the record. All questions from the public should be directed through the chair. This meeting is live and streamed on Sandwich Community Television's website and on local Channel 9. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on the SCTV website at www.sandwichtv.org tomorrow. According to town bylaw, meetings are audio recorded. If anyone intends to also record, kindly notify the chair. Any recordings? Okay, thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First on the agenda is public comment. Oh, do I take a motion to open the meeting? No. Okay. Public comment. Any public comment? Okay, seeing none. We'll go to review and approval of minutes from January 21st, 2025. Does anyone have any comments or anything to mention about those? All right, seeing none, I'll take a motion to approve.
I make a motion to approve the minutes from January 21st, 2025.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Submission of new plans. Any submissions of new plans? Seeing.
I guess the A&R plan that I'm later on in the agenda, but I do have a new plan.
Okay, great. Yeah, that'll be that's on the agenda. This one's if anybody comes before us.
Okay.
Yeah, with a plan that we weren't expecting.
Got it.
Okay, great. Thanks. So no new plans that aren't on the agenda. Old business, there is none to discuss, so we'll hop right into the Gully Lane approval not required plan. So starting that agenda item, the background of the meeting, it was an application for an approval not required for 35 Gully Lane and 39 Gully Lane. It was filed on January 7th, 2025. The site is located in R2 zoning district. The applicant is reconfiguring the cemetery lot. No new lots are being created. The proposed plan meets the required criteria for A&R endorsement under Mass General Law 166.1, Chapter 41, Section 81L. The applicant and owner is it Ellin? Ellin, okay. Ellin Asack on behalf of Constance S. Crowell Trust of 1991 and Marr Family Trust Agreement, Constance S. Crowell Trust of 1991, and the Marr Family Trust Agreement. We have one memo to read into the record. It's dated January 28, 2025. Subject is 0 Gully Lane, parcel 58-43, and 39 Gully Lane, 58-030-002. A&R submission is from Sean Harrington, Infrastructure Manager. He states the engineering department has reviewed the subject application dated January 27th, 2025, and plan dated January 20th, 2025. The following comments are offered for the board's consideration. The plan provides the information required by subdivision rules and regulations, section 3.A, with the exception of 3.A.2 sufficient topographic delineation, including existing streams and bodies of water, shall be shown on the plan or a separate plan to allow the board to determine if the lots have adequate access. That's the only memorandum that I have here. So we'll start with the applicant. If you want to come forward and just state your name.
Sure. Well, I'm not the applicant, I'm the surveyor. So I'm here representing the Constance Crowell Trust and the Marr Family Trust. I brought the plan on board, so I don't know, you guys have it up on the screen. So either way, I did speak with Sean last week about that comment, and he basically said, I'm not sure if you guys spoke to him as well. He just kind of said that comment was sort of a formality since contours weren't shown. But we discussed how topographic contours they have no bearing on the project, so that's why they're not on the plan. But I do show access to both lots if you scroll down, both driveways. So it meets the vital access standard of an A&R, according to the subdivision control law. So that's basically it. So what they're doing, if you scroll up again to the north, is you see the dashed lines are the existing property lines. So what they're doing is abandoning those property lines and closing off the cemetery lot so that the trustees of Constance, Crowell, Ellin, Asack can access the cemetery lot without crossing private property. It's in a nutshell. So if you have anything to add, since you're obviously more knowledgeable about this scenario.
Yeah, so there are existing lots. We're not creating any new lots. There was a cemetery. There was my lot, 35 Gully Lane is where I live. So we're not doing anything to 35 Gully Lane. I know that it reads that way on the agenda, but that's not. It's the cemetery lot is 0 Gully Lane, and the other lot is 39 Gully Lane. I'm the previous owner of all 3 lots. And the new owner of 39 Gully Lane is now, owns it. So all we're doing is cleaning up the lot lines so it makes a little more sense for 39 to be not jumbled up with the cemetery lot.
So the line for the cemetery lot, was it not?
There's if you scroll down, there's a blow up detail that you can see.
Go to the details.
So, as it stands now, the property line comes up, and the cemetery lot's just sort of this like isolated island with this 5-foot strip. So what we're doing is we're getting rid of this property line and getting rid of this property line and making this adjoining to, so that they're common owners and they're adjoining. That's the goal.
So what was that little strip before? Was that an access to
It was an easement.
It was an easement.
It was an easement. So we're
No,
just.
it wasn't an easement.
Yeah, it was an easement.
No, it's part of the lot.
Yeah, that's correct.
No, it was an easement in the deed. It's a deeded
It's
easement.
not as currently shown in the plans
Yeah.
before this change. It is part of the lot. It is not an easement.
Well, there was an easement over it.
Part of lot 39.
So I think the easement.
Understand that cemetery, in order to access it, there's a 5-foot strip. It is a lot. It's not a easement over someone else's property. It's not a right of way.
The easement I think she speaks of.
Yes, it was.
Say that definitively because an easement goes over a lot.
Yes.
So it could be a lot owned by someone with an easement right for another to use it. They're separate things.
It was not a separate lot. It belonged to 39 Gully Lane.
Okay.
And 35 Gully Lane had a right of easement over it. And so all we're doing, for the purchase and sale, we were gonna clean that up, and we're just doing that, getting.
I don't believe that's correct. You help me, but
Yeah,
I understand it.
as a surveyor,
The property line is 5 feet away.
So
That's why it has to be moved. And
So
and the reason the property line is there was to give a 5-foot.
I'm gonna go up there and I'm gonna explain as the surveyor. So the easement, I believe, is she had a deeded easement to just cross the property to get to the lot. This was a lot, as you say. This is correct. This is not an easement. This was part of
That lot. that's
parcel
correct.
ID 5843. So I
Which
think
is 0 for purposes of this application. Okay.
Which one of the zeros, because there are actually multiple zeros, so be careful when you say it's 0. You have to go by the parcel number. And it goes all the way over to conservation land, which is how you can access the cemetery currently.
No. You can't access the cemetery through the private conservation land. It's not,
Not private.
I mean,
Town owns
but
it.
it's owned by the town, so no. The conservation land doesn't have any paths to access access that. There's only certain paths in that conservation land.
Nothing prevents you from walking the conservation land and then walking to the cemetery, my understanding. Cemeteries have to,
Yeah, you can't cut down you're not supposed to go through, that parcel of town land has rules and regulations. Yeah, and so, no, you're not supposed to go off the paths.
Are you saying it's not traversable?
No, it is not. No.
Well,
So
that's-
it was never an access. It's just part of the lot.
I understand, but my understanding of why it's part of the lot.
I'm the owner of it, so I will explain why.
No, I understand you're the owner of it.
I created it here in this.
I know.
Yeah, so it has a deeded easement across 39 Gully Lane. We're just cleaning the lot lines up, that's all. It's not an access. That was part of the lot.
I don't think so.
What, I don't understand, what don't you,
It's, my point is it's a lot.
It's one lot, yeah.
Yeah, it's the cemetery lot
Yeah.
has a 5-foot piece that goes to conservation land. And you want to eliminate that 5-foot piece, I understand.
yes.
I know.
Okay, so,
Which I was gonna ask a question for Leanne maybe. So a cemetery, which is privately owned, and I know there are state regulations on cemeteries. So can you share those with us as far as access and so forth?
Yep, so when we went through this the first time, we checked with town council because we had never seen an A&R that involved a private cemetery. So what they explained to us at that point was that a property owner must allow people to enter the private cemetery if they wish to visit the person that is buried there, but that it is on the private side. It's not within the town regulations, and there was nothing that we could do within an A&R process to ensure access to that private cemetery, but that it was on the property owner to allow access if someone did wish to visit a person buried in a private cemetery.
So if this 5-foot strip goes away, individuals can still visit that cemetery?
They would have to consult with
Permission
the
of
property
the owner.
owner, either the Marrs or Miss Asack, and ask to cross property.
And is that how it's currently with the 5-foot strip? They have to,
They would still have to, because there's no way to get to that 5-foot strip from the topography. There's no clear path. You'd have to cross private property to get to that private burial site, yeah.
well, there is conservation land that abuts it.
There is conservation land, but when you look at the topography of it, because I did an aerial shot to see where the trails were, there's no clear-cut way to get there. I mean, you could try to make your way there.
You could.
Yeah,
Yeah, I looked at the area also, and I drove by it today.
yeah.
did I answer all your questions, Jeff?
Is there, on the cemetery itself, are there currently any borders or boundaries, like fence, rock wall, things of that nature?
There's a stockade fence on one side, it's shown
Which
on
side?
the plan. The southwest, the north arrows.
So
Yeah,
just
right
that
there.
side as a stockade?
And then there's some posts that kind of delineate it. I did locate the posts. It didn't come up with my conversation with Sean, so I didn't want to. I just left it alone. I didn't add the posts, but there is delineation in the field
So the delineation of field aligns with the current
with the property lines.
configuration?
Mostly yes.
What I'm wondering was the left side where you're going to eliminate the gap, the property line currently goes up and there's was it 6 feet? I'm not sure if I recall it correctly. Is it delineation on that side? I'm curious where the delineation is. Is it on the edge of the cemetery or is it on that property line between 35 and 39?
It's on what is now a dashed line on the.
It's on the dash line.
Yeah.
And behind, and then it's a stockade, and then there's field of posts and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's curious, Liam, cemetery commission, So we have a cemetery commission, and this is not a town cemetery, it's a privately owned. Does that fall under them? Do they still have some, so they have no,
No, the town really has no say or input over a private cemetery.
but the state does?
The state does, yeah. There's state regulations associated with private cemeteries.
And this, with removal, reconfiguration, we would still comply with state regulations?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Is there any questions I have?
What precipitated this? You mentioned it was just to kind of clean up lot lines, so it was maybe something when you were selling 39 that you didn't envision would maybe need to be cleaned up? or-
No, it was part of, it's just that we're late on the schedule as part of the sale of 39, so it was intended, at that time.
It was intended
To do the reconfiguration. As a matter of fact, this has been on the table for quite some time. Not Sean, but Sam Jensen. I presented the plan to him first in 2021. So we're just getting to it now. We had some other things to take care of.
I feel like there has been a little bit of contention.
Yeah.
Neck of the woods.
So that took some time. My neighbor did not come tonight, but that did take some time to untangle, and so we're just getting to it now. But the reason that it was an easement, so I could cross over it. So now we're just going to eliminate the easement, and their lot is going to eliminate part of the cemetery so that it's clear. It's more clear cut where their land is, where the boundaries are, and it's connected to 35. It did. As you can see, if you scroll up and look at the other, the configuration of what it is now, and over the box.
This box?
Yeah. So you can see where the cemetery is, and where their lot, all of that is carved out of Lot 6, which is 39 Gully Lane.
Does this, if I understand it correctly, the old plan, which I pulled up, the cemetery lot did not abut your property.
No, but I owned all of them, so it
Right.
didn't matter at that
No,
point.
I understand that, but just in the context of your sale, right? Just to kind of add, maybe, so that I'm understanding it correctly. So the purpose of this reconfiguration was because the cemetery lot did not abut your lot, and the only access you had to it was by way of either that little strip or an easement.
Only
was
by
a-
the easement, yeah.
Only by the easement. And then there was that little strip, however, whether that be for access or whatever the case may be, that little strip belonged to the cemetery lot that existed as it currently is on the plan.
Correct.
All you're doing now is removing that little strip, making that part of the lot that you sold, and taking the cemetery lot and pushing it over to abut your lot. So now you don't need an easement, you can access the cemetery lot. And if anybody else wants to come view it, they can either get an easement from you,
Right.
your neighbor, or they can traverse if they elect to do so. But they can't really even go on the cemetery lot because it's privately owned anyway. So unless you have like the
No,
state.
there's rights to
There's
people to
rights
visit
to
private
visit.
cemeteries.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's what you're doing. You're taking that little piece off, moving it over, and removing any other rights of access over your neighbor's lot.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
it cleans up their lot. And so
Clarify,
Well, let her, if she
So
can
the
respond.
reason the lot was configured that way in the first place
Okay.
was not as for access. It was just because the person who's buried there liked to walk along that border.
Okay.
And there was an animal corridor, the wildlife and so on and so forth, the birds. So it was only designed specifically for that. It's never been accessed. It's not possible to access it. You can walk all the way out there to the edge of the conservation land, but there's thick briars and, swampy stuff, and nobody's gonna walk through to the path. And then also on the eastern side, on that boundary,
you're not gonna be able to cut through to the town property without cutting briars, and we're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to cut down. So no one could access it that way. The only way to access is through the driveway off of Gully Lane.
Okay.
And that is the way people have been accessing it since it was created and since 2006 when she was buried there. So nothing will change about access. It'll be the same access.
Okay. Thank you.
The question I was gonna ask Leanne, because I keep hearing this term, an easement's needed. I don't believe any easements have to be issued in order to visit the cemetery. Is that correct?
No.
That's what I thought. Okay, so there are no easements required. And is it, you have to be grant, or an individual makes a request and they can be denied? I don't know what the state law. I looked it up, I read it.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't typically deny
No,
someone.
I understand how you would or wouldn't. I'm just wondering what the law requires.
Yeah, the law requires that private property can be traversed to visit the gravesite, that access must be granted.
Okay,
Now, of
must be
course,
granted.
yes. Now, of course, I mean, in a reasonable society, you'd knock on a door and ask or something to that effect. You wouldn't just traverse over someone's property, but
No, I
that's
understand.
just the way it's phrased, yeah.
My understanding, asking my questions, a couple of them. One was access to it. I want to make sure that through this action, we're all of a sudden creating a situation where it could not be accessed by someone who wanted to go see it for meaningful reasons, and get clarification on that. The other was, as you're moving the lines, that's why I asked the question about where the current boundary markers are and so forth. I wanted to understand if any of those were going to have to be moved, or the delineation is now going to line up with what's currently there. And it sounds like they will line up with what the movement you want to make.
There are the permanent markers out there right now are land court bounds on either end of the boundary of the. I guess it's the eastern. It looks like the northern boundary. The way we're looking at it, it's the southeastern boundary. There's two land court bounds on either end of that boundary line, and then there's a iron rod with a plastic cap that marks the corner of 35 and hopefully what will be the new corner of the cemetery lot.
Yeah, I was more interested in fencing, stone wall, the kinds of things that typically go up around older cemetery. Thank you.
So what specifically is the question for this board? If it's legal?
So there's 3 criteria to meet for A&R endorsement. An A&R is basically just that this does not require a subdivision, that no roadway is being created, no new building lots. You can A&R property if it's on public or private roadways if you have enough access. So basically you're looking to make sure that both lots have access. The cemetery is slightly different. We probably will never come across one of these again. This is a one-of-a-kind type deal. But you're looking at access. Often you're looking at topography to make sure things can be accessed. You're looking that it fronts on a public or private way, that is a street, that it's not just a paper road. So it meets all the criteria for an endorsement. This is not a subdivision, but it's just a little bit different to what we're usually dealing with because it holds a private cemetery.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything to ask or add?
I think it probably goes without saying, but your neighbor, the Marr's Family Trust, is a co-applicant on this paperwork, so
Yes.
they're aware of everything that's
Yes.
going on. Okay.
Yes, and we made sure we had signatures from both applicants.
Okay.
Great. With that, I will take a motion to endorse the A&R.
I make a motion to endorse the A&R for 35 Gully Lane and 39 Gully Lane.
Second that motion?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Anyone oppose or abstain? Approved.
I believe the surveyor has the Mylar with him tonight if you want to sign it, Jennifer. And one plan set.
Okay.
Oh,
Should I
those.
leave this with you guys and pick it up at a later date, or?
Do you do that tomorrow?
You can do it now.
Oh, she'll do it. We'll do it right now.
Whatever you
Right now?
prefer.
Thank you.
we'll do a little recap about
Yeah.
this whole thing.
Okay, and then the Mylar is there with the Sharpie.
Okay, great, cool.
Full paper. This is ridiculous. Okay. I got it. Oh, I did. Thank you.
It's actually, it goes in the way. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Did you give that a second to-
So, all set there, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the proposed zoning amendments continued from our previous meeting. First with the accessory dwelling units. Turn it over to you.
So I think there was some questions on the existing language as presented last time, so I'm happy to go through, where we ended up, if I can access it. It's been a little temperamental, let me keep it this way. So the first section, I don't believe we had much questions on, and it's really as we kind of got down. So I went to council. The first thing I asked was about the landscape plan and if we could request that to be submitted as part of the building permit process. What council responded to me was that we can only ask for requirements on ADUs that we ask for single family homes. So the way they've written it in the legislation is that with it being a protected class, we can't regulate it more than we regulate the use of a single family home in a residential district. In Sandwich, we don't require landscaping plans as part of just a building permit process for a by right use. So I don't think in this case we would be able to, I think we could request one. I don't think we'd be able to enforce one as part of the process. But I think as part of site plan review, we would ask to see kind of what they were thinking in terms of screening and those options. The next one came from the engineering department. So they were just a little bit concerned that previously we had said that all parking shall be off street and it will be pervious, meaning it will be gravel. We're having a lot of runoff issues, especially on smaller lots, that they're worried that excessive chipping or stone would end up in the drainage basins. So we asked the question, could we ask for an impervious surface, a paving spot to be included? Council believes that that was a reasonable requirement. I think the only time it may cause us some trouble is if we get into an instance of lot coverage. If the paved parking spot increases lot coverage enough that the person would not be able to construct an ADU, then that would be seen as an unreasonable request. So it may be, we might have to phrase it a little bit more where it's case by case, like where possible.
Where complies.
Yes,
Yeah,
because if we get into a smaller lot and there's a lot of, decking and paving already, it could trip that lot coverage calculation. So that might be something that we're just going to have to discuss a little bit more. Sam has not been in the office for the last week, so he gets back tomorrow. So I'm going to go over some of this with him. So I'll have that for the public hearing on the 18th, where the board can discuss kind of the final set of language that they want to move forward with.
So, Leanne, let me understand. So the one prior to this, town council advised not to require a landscape plan because we don't require a landscape plan on single homes.
Correct.
And the next one they advised, yes, you can put non-permeable. Yeah.
Yep.
However, I know for a fact that on single homes, we don't require that. So on one, they're saying you can't, and the other saying you can, even though they both contradict each other.
Yes. which yes, it makes things confusing. And I guess what they thought was it just triggered, the landscaping plan triggered the cost of having a professional, landscape surveyor submit a plan, and that would have been at a higher cost than perhaps some driveway work. But
then I'd argue,
sure.
Making a driveway that is non-permeable is more expensive than a permeable one. So that argument goes out the window like the other one.
The hard part about this is quite a lot of it is subjective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's, you know, it's gonna come down to what the public, you know, what the public desires, and if we can meet that, so.
Yes. And we're only really going to get a lot of answers to these questions when we start to see the case law start to come in. So it's difficult, and I got this and I read the same thing, and I said I would assumed both would have been no if one was.
Well,
or both would have been yes.
if you're gonna be consistent with your argument, they would both either be yes or both either be no.
Yes.
I think the value of having, for ADUs, a landscape plan, and having seen how some ADUs have gone in and issues that is created with some neighbors is something we should still consider.
Yeah.
And I understand what the town council is saying, but as we just saw, it's subjective.
Yes.
Because in one case they said yes, and the other case they said no, and the same argument.
Is there a public safety element to this, though? If we're talking, it sounds like it may be a drainage problem. No?
Not really, because it would be so minor.
Okay.
I think they're focused on protecting the public facilities as best as possible, but I don't think it would create something so hazardous that we could lean on public safety as a rationale. But we can keep these elements in and just see what happens when it gets to the AG's office. I mean, they'll just kick it back and tell us to remove certain parts if it doesn't comply with what they feel. So, you know, there's no harm, so to speak, if we you know, keep elements in that we think are important, that are a little bit gray in the statute right now as to whether or not they would pass or would not pass.
I think what I struggle with is it seems that council was pretty clear that they didn't think the landscape plan was an okay ask. And if we push it, we get them, then it's just gonna be a lot of quibbling about the subjective nature of landscaping. So I'm not sure I see the value, really. The parking spot is a pretty consistent ask, and he's saying he thinks it's a reasonable ask, and it's a consistent ask. And it's one that is also still not foolproof. So there's still wiggle room.
And it falls within the jurisdiction of a planning board, you know, the perviousness and driveways, maybe maybe not building. Subdivision control, no, it wouldn't even fall underneath us, would it?
It falls under the purview of the engineering department. They have their driveway regulations, but they don't require that everything be paved within their driveway regulations.
So I think maybe the distinction between the two may be there's no landscaping department per se. It doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of a department within the town, but there is a jurisdiction in which the surface of, you know, a driveway, you know, could be part of. So maybe that might be enough of a distinction where she feels it's more reasonable.
Yeah, I think from what I got from my conversation with her, and not just in the I'm blue, she's pink in this, but was more related to burden. It's just that threshold of what's more of a burden on a homeowner versus not a burden. And I think she thought the parking spot seemed reasonable, but the landscape plan might be more burdensome, and it may deter people from putting in ADUs. But I mean, I think you can make the argument each way.
Because the cost of paving is expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
It's probably equally, if not more
And I would
expensive
think
than a plan. Actually, it would be more expensive than a landscaping plan, paving.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, depending on materials people want to use, the labor involved, all those types of things. And then also just getting into that issue of it making your lot coverage go up. I mean, that could render the project null and void right there. So I would just have a few concerns about, you know, how we worded it. I don't think we could say it shall be impervious. You know, I think that would be too strong.
Yeah.
And that's something that could still be kicked back by the AG, even though we've deliberated and made what we feel is a good path forward.
Yeah, so after you go through your language, and if you voted to go on to the select board for them to vote to put it on the warrant, and it passes successfully at town meeting at a 2/3 vote, it goes to the Attorney General's office. It stays there for about 3 to 4 months, and they make sure that it's consistent with state law. So they're going to get a lot of these this town meeting cycle. So we'll probably be well into the fall before we hear back from them, just because they're going to be overwhelmed. So they will kick it back if they don't think it's lawful.
Is there any discussion with other towns? Are you getting a chance to see what they're writing in theirs to kind of maybe get some ideas and see what other towns are doing, so there's some kind of cohesion with?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them are very similar. There's some that are putting in much more restrictive language to just see would it hold up.
Yeah.
But I've basically just been following the state's bylaw.
Okay.
So it was published on January 31st. It's in effect since the 3rd, yesterday. So it basically just lays out exactly what you can and can't do, and the reasons why. But a lot of it, when you read it, like a lot of it is subjective. Let me show you. So like unreasonable regulations, the municipality may reasonably regulate and restrict protected ADUs, provided that any restriction or regulation imposed by municipality shall be unreasonable if the restriction or regulation which applicable to the protected ADU use does not serve a legitimate municipal interest, serves a municipal interest sought to be achieved by local zoning, but does not rationally relate to the legitimate municipal interest, serves a legitimate municipal interest sought to be achieved by local zoning, and its application of a protected use rationally relates to the interest, but compliance with the regulation or restriction will nullify the use or the development, impose excessive costs on the use or development, substantially diminish or interfere with the use or development. So like that language is so gray. So it's very just opinion right now as to what that means, what can we reasonably enforce and what we can't. So this process, it's hard because I don't have clear answers for you as to can we mandate a landscape plan, can we have pervious or impervious.
More of that nexus though with the municipal interest with the basin versus the landscaping. So I think that might be at least an argument to be had that it
Has a
serves a
municipal
purpose.
interest. Yeah.
Yeah, a municipal interest. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would argue that putting greenery that creates a buffer as a municipal interest also. As far as noise, lights, I don't know, this is one of the issues I hear with some of the ADUs, is the lighting and there's the noise, because you've got increased number of people there and so forth. That's one of the arguments I hear. We're asking for a landscape plan. Within that, what landscape is going to be required, not required, that, the board will discuss it and we'll agree or disagree. So, my point is I can see an argument either way on all of these. And, I printed it off today and I read it also. And like you say, it's very vague. It's going to take a lot of questioning. And as you said, I looked at a few that are online. Some towns are being relaxed and some towns are going very restrictive.
Yeah.
And as far as a landscape plan, it doesn't necessarily mean or say that it has to be a professional landscape plan. It could just be a plan drawn by the homeowner on what plants, say maybe if it is a concern of a buffer zone, it gives the ability to throw in some.
Yeah, it doesn't say it has to be by a registered land.
That's right.
Landscape architect, yeah.
My concern is less about the plan itself versus now we have a plan and how do we debate the requirements, and there's no requirement, so.
What if, and is there a way if to help in the event of a challenge to put in the thought process behind why they were put in there, maybe to take some of the subjectivity out? Or could you do that on a second pass perhaps? Like if we did landscaping, maybe say to address concerns of, buffer or something like that, kind of, I don't know what the council might say, better to leave it more broad going in and maybe tighten it up on a second pass, or?
Yeah, I don't think this will be our last time revising these regulations. I think as time goes on and we see more about what was allowed, we will be coming back to this. But also these conversations that we have here is what sets the context and the spirit of what is intended with the bylaw. So when I look at bylaws that were created in the 80s, I go back to the minutes and say, well,
okay,
it's not my interpretation. What was the board thinking at the time? What was the interpretation of why the planning board brought this forward? So we do that all the time if there's any ambiguity, right? That's not the word. Ambiguity, thank you. With any of the regulations. So we always go back to the spirit and the intent of the bylaw as well as just the words.
okay.
So like these conversations are important, and that's why we capture them clearly in the minutes, and we have the recordings so we can refer back to.
Oh, great, okay. Anyone else on the reports?
I mean, I think for now, it sounds like we maybe want to keep them in and discuss them further at the public hearing. Sam will be here at the public hearing from engineering to be able to discuss the parking spots and what the engineering department would like to see there. And we can change the language at the public hearing. We're not supposed to change too much, but you can change, you know, minor elements, and seeing as how this is in here already, it doesn't change too much by taking it out, if that's the way you want to go at the end. And then the next question was just
Could
about,
I,
oh,
sorry, could I clarification?
Sure.
Are we putting landscaping in or not?
I was going to keep it in.
Keep it in, yeah.
Oh, I didn't think it was in here. I thought you didn't have it.
Oh, sorry, okay, oh yeah, I just have it as
You
a
kept
question.
pervious in,
Okay,
but you took landscaping out because of what the town council said. So we're gonna put landscaping back in.
yes.
Thank you.
Add that back in. And then we had questions regarding permitting a second ADU. So I just asked, you know, can we regulate ownership as part of the special permit, you know, and all of those additional requirements that would have previously been part of it. And she believed that yes, we could, but the AG's office has not weighed in on that. So there's not much talk about that opt-in option for the second ADU, but the second one is not a protected class. So we don't see any reason why we couldn't have that as part of our special permit process, that, you know, all of these regulations that once previously applied will now apply again. So when a permit comes before the board, and you would be the board that it would come before, that you could ask for those things.
Okay. Yeah, I'm still on the fence about adding that in, primarily because it would be nice to see the first wave go through before allowing a second ADU, just to see, you know, the impact, the burden on the town and the resources. I think as a planning board, you know, whether or not we agree to bring it to public hearing is maybe just something we can kind of touch on quick, just because I think at this time, maybe because we can always add it later.
Yes.
You know, so perhaps we consider waiting on the second ADU and just see how the first ADU by right goes, you know, because if you're tying up resources with second ADUs, maybe you won't have enough to get to all the first ADUs either. And then you're going to start, you know, subjectivity, and it could just kind of open Pandora's box too, especially when the AG is trying to, and the towns are trying to figure out what the bylaws are supposed to be for the first. I just think it's a lot. And I don't think it might not be ready to even go to public hearing to even be considered for town meeting. So I'm interested in other people's thoughts on that.
So Leanne, are you saying just take that piece out altogether right now?
So the permitting of a second ADU is an opt-in option for municipality. We don't have to adopt it. It's a conversation for you all to have about whether or not you think that the community would want this. For me, it's a little scary just as a planning professional, because it's the way these ADUs are written right now. It could really change the landscape of our neighborhoods, and then just permitting a second when we don't know what the first are even going to look like. But I understand the intent is obviously to create more year-round housing, which is a good thing. But I just think a slower approach might be best. But I mean, it's really up to you and what the residents think, and if this is something that would benefit the community or not.
So it can always be put back
You
then?
can always add it. It can always be added later.
So what we're talking about here is what's gonna go next, which is to the public hearing.
Correct.
So if it's not in here, we don't get to hear from the public on what they think. And as you said, if it goes to the public hearing, not supposed to change it very much, but if we hear from the public that don't want us at this time to address second ADUs, we can take it out.
Correct.
But if we don't have it in here, we will never hear from them. So my recommendation is, since we are allowed to do this, we should share with the public. The state allows us to do this. We need your feedback. Should we address it at this time or not? This is how we would address it. And my recommendation would be, what we share with them is, we're going to address it exactly how we addressed ADUs previously. If they go to special permit, they'll go exactly as they did previously, and those requirements will be in place.
I also think from a planning perspective, and as a planning board member, it would be wise to see how, as Leanne said, the first wave of ADUs affects our planning and development. And I'm not saying that I don't want to hear from the public as it relates to the second ADU, but I think that a timeline and setting that as it's rolled out is important. And I think that's within our jurisdiction and with our purview and with an eye towards planning, that guiding that conversation is important. And I think guiding it might begin with rolling it out in phases, starting with the first ADUs, seeing how that happens, letting it roll out, seeing how the impact is on our planning department, seeing how it is with construction, seeing how it is with runoff, because we don't know how it's going to impact drainage. And we are accomplishing the goal of more housing significantly with this first ADU. So I think the goals are still being accomplished, but I think a slower rollout might serve multiple people and offices and departments well.
So the rollout of it, let's just play this out. So we leave it in, we get feedback from people in town that they don't want it in, it's a terrible idea, so we take it out. That kind of settles that. So we go to the meeting and everybody thinks it's a wonderful idea. Do we still have the opportunity to phase in the implementation of it? Or is it, if it's in there, it's immediately, you're able to implement it immediately?
Yeah, so that decision's up to the planning board after, so you hear from the public at the public hearing. If the public loved it and wanted you to move forward with it, but you felt that I want to give it a year, you would have to take it out of the public hearing language. So you're voting to put forward what's going to go on town meeting warrant.
Okay.
And it can't be phased from that point. It's in effect from the date of town meeting, retroactively from when the AG approves it.
And I also think if I can add with the second ADU, I think it might be, again, wise to consider getting the feel in the public hearing with the first ADU, because what if, playing it out, we present them with a second ADU and they're like, we can't even take this first ADU now. If we go to present it as the second ADU at a later date after we had already presented it, they're already tainted.
Yeah.
They're not going to want to see it. Whereas if we wait and decide at a later date to present the second ADU, we can say, look how the first one rolled out. It hasn't really, we can have something to rely on to show them why we're bringing it before them.
I think it should go to the public hearing. I think we should get the feedback. I have a lot of interest in hearing from the public. I hold them in high regard. I think they're able to decipher between 1 and 2. I think they can give us good feedback. As Leanne said, we can have it in here. They can say they love it, and we can still take it out and go readdress it in the future. But otherwise, we get no input.
And for clarity, Jeff, I also hold the public in high regard. I serve them on the board.
I didn't say you didn't. I should say who I am.
I understand, but as you like to clarify quite frequently, I too like to clarify. Just because you're stating that you like to hold the public, or you do hold the public in high regard, my opinion is the same, although with a different direction as far as, what my thoughts are on permitting the second ADU to be presented at public hearing. So
I understand. I'll explain it to you. Whenever I have the option to hear from the public, I take that opportunity. So public hearings, to me, we should present the information. We should make a decision here. What we should do is hear from the public. We should make a decision that, they're not ready to hear that. They may
Nobody
get
said not ready.
confused.
Nobody said confused. Those certainly were not points that left my mouth, nor thoughts in my head. And well, I'm interested to hear from others on the board.
Sort of processing, I feel like maybe this board is a really good snapshot of what the public might look like, and it seems like we have a difference of opinion, so I wonder if we do this presentation to the public, and we leave with really a mixed bag of opinions from that, what our path forward is there. But I think I understand what you're saying is that it's always important when you are making a big change like this is, and this is, I think, something that is great for the housing crisis that we're kind of having now, but we really don't have proof of concept as to how this is going to affect our little town. So I'm I agree that there might be, with the one ADU, that we would, after we implement that, or that is implemented, we would have a little bit more proof of concept of how that sort of flows through our town, how it flows through our town government offices. Am I understanding that's kind of what?
Right, just to see how the rollout would look, how it would affect the town, how it would affect the neighbors. And I also think we might gain greater feedback if we were to wait, because, you know, we would have seen it, we would have experienced it, Leanne and, you know, other members of the, you know, engineering department can give us some feedback, because maybe, you know, if we roll out this and find out that there's a pervious issue, we can't put in the paved, or we can't do all paved, and it should be pervious. Well, now we think, okay, well, when we do our second ADUs, now when we write that in, we know that that would be like a condition. I think it's thoughtful, it's responsible, and I'm not saying I don't want to hear from them, clearly. I just think bringing the first ADU before them, that's a lot to take in too, you know, and it is going to be a big change.
It is a lot of change from what it has been.
Yeah.
And it was it wasn't confusing for us, but I could see where it was confusing to the public before, because it was pretty heavily regulated. Yes.
And then there's the impact on the town offices too.
Right.
That's, to me, one of the most compelling points is, do the town offices need to adjust to this, what is an anticipated increase in need? And is it reasonable for this board to say, we need to gauge absorbing the change for the first ADU before we can go further?
Yeah, I'm not so concerned about municipal services impact. I'm more concerned about neighborhood impact. Yeah, more just like how people would feel with having a potential 3-unit rental compound next door, which can still happen. And if someone has an existing one right now that doesn't meet the guidelines, I mean, that can still, it doesn't mean it won't happen. It's more just like how it's going to impact the neighborhoods. In terms of permitting and staff time, I think we'll be okay to, you know, building costs are still high, interest is still high, so I'm not expecting a huge boom straight away. It will eventually occur, but right now it's very expensive to do construction projects, and we are seeing a slowdown in permits. So I don't anticipate that everyone will rush to do this immediately. From what I've heard from the community, the biggest problem with this is actually the size of the ADU. It is a lot smaller than what we originally permitted. So we used to permit 900 square feet of habitable living space, and habitable living space does not include basements, porches, decks, hallways, bathrooms, closets. This is now 900 square feet of gross floor area. That's everything. So if you want a basement, I mean, you're looking at a 450 square foot unit. It's a lot smaller.
It's tiny houses.
They're much, much smaller. So that may be something that will come up at your public hearing, that can we make it bigger? I did ask that question. We would have to do a separate ADU XL bylaw.
I was just going to ask, can we have our old ADU bylaw in there for ADUs larger than those allowed by right? So if somebody didn't want to do a by right one, they could still come before us and ask for a special permit with the same guidelines that we had for the larger one. Could they do that?
They can, but we can't do it at this point now, because I don't have that advertised.
Oh, okay.
The advertised was a change to the existing ADU regulations for the public hearing. The legal ad's already been put in, and it's to comply with state regulations. If we were to keep this, I would have rephrased that. So legally now, I wouldn't be able to, but we could reintroduce that in the late summer, early fall, if we wanted to reinstitute our old accessory dwelling unit bylaw and maybe rename it larger accessory dwelling unit bylaw, have them all by special, or whatever way we want that to look. But we can do that, but just not at this juncture.
I think you told us this last meeting, but if it's not in here, what is the pathway to having a second? Is there still a pathway to having a second?
No, the only thing I was stating was the way the statute was written is that a lot of people will have accessory apartments or accessory dwelling units currently, and if they don't meet the definitions of what this new protected class ADU is, they're not considered a protected class ADU, and you're still allowed to have one of these. So there could be homes out there. You know, I actually got an inquiry about one today, and I think that, yeah, that they are going to be able to permit a second one on their property because their first one does not fit any of the criteria of what this is. It was from the 80s, and so there will be homeowners that will be able to get a second one, but it just all depends on what they constructed at the first point. And it gets very technical, so you have to look at all the gross floor area, and you got to half it and make sure that the size was different, and it, you know, we're grappling with how to figure this out for everything to make sure we're being consistent and compliant.
Oh, so if you have an existing ADU that's allowed, you, under this protected class ADU, this could constitute as a second ADU.
Yes,
that.
because they wouldn't constitute your first ADU as an ADU.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so that was a question that was brought up a lot through a lot of the webinars we did with the state and the AG's office, just trying to get clarification. I mean, there must have been 500 planners on the calls, just trying to get clarification on how exactly we're supposed to implement these guidelines.
Wait, I want to understand what you said, Jennifer. It would be your first ADU under these new regs. We would consider it the second one because they already have one. Is that
Right, yeah, so,
Okay, yeah.
yeah, I think,
Yeah,
I think.
No, I don't. I wanted to ask Leanne a question. Existing ADU, new rules come in. The existing ADU does not comply with the new rules. Therefore, it is not classified as an ADU.
Correct.
So it's not you get a second one, or you're getting a first one.
You're getting the
because
first one.
The ADU does not meet, therefore it's not an ADU. Now,
I'm just saying, but in general terms, you're getting the new one under this rule, but in our general terms, it's a second.
Yeah.
Accessory
Oh,
dwelling unit.
it's the first ADU. because-
Well,
Yeah, that's what I'm
do you
saying.
understand what I mean?
Yeah, I do understand what you're, and I.
Now, let me ask you about the existing. The existing gets grandfathered, is that what happens? Because it's in, once that ADU goes away, it's now a non-compliant structure.
Yeah.
So it gets grandfathered as compliant?
Yes, it gets grandfathered. And what the hard part to grapple with is, can we still enforce the regulations upon which that first ADU
Good question.
was? And that was a question I had to council, and they said it's so dependent on all of the factors that went into that individual lot. So if you have an ADU that was permitted as an ADU, it's not considered an ADU, can we still require that the property owner resides on the property? And like, we have a bunch of deed restrictions on these units at this point. We probably have at least 55 since this whole process was implemented in 2020, 2021. So I would hope that we can still enforce those, even if someone were to get, you know, the protected class ADU.
So taking it a step further, if we did bring this to public hearing, we got, you know, overwhelming support, and then brought it to town meeting and it got approved, conceivably, we could get a third ADU or a second ADU under, you know,
Protected class.
under the protected class. So that's how that would operatively work. So there could potentially be three.
and that would be the limit.
In one primary living space.
Yes.
Two ADUs and, well, there would be the ADU protected class. There would be the pre-existing one,
Which is the
that's not
primary
considered an
living space,
ADU, which is
right?
primary living
Okay.
space.
And then the second ADU.
And then there would be the second ADU. So there would be essentially 4 living spaces, separate living spaces, because you would need for that second, it's a different kitchen and all of that. So however you define it, you know, colloquially, I guess for our purposes, it would be 3 ADUs to understand it in just a simple context. Which is another reason, again, why I think it's important to roll it out, because then you'll see how all these little things that maybe we're not thinking or really feeling or seeing with the rollout.
Right. It's impossible for us to speculate
Everything.
every person's situation.
Right.
Um,
Neighborhoods
Yeah.
and
And the town lost records, so somebody that feels they permitted something back in the 60s or 70s, there was a flood and a fire. And
So planning has all their records.
Okay.
So none of ours are destroyed. We have them all.
if somebody did say like bisect their house and make it into 2 individual living spaces, potentially those permits could be lost.
Yeah, so there's a 10-year vested rights period. So if a use or a structure goes past 10 years and there's been no complaints on file, it becomes legal. So anything that was lost at some point, things become legal over time periods. We only have a certain time period. I think it's 7 years for dimensions on a building permit, and then for land use zoning, it's 10 years. You get vested rights for that.
But I always wondered, because I deal with this, outside, and I've always read that statute to me insofar as it relates to zoning, not to building. So how would that work?
They're separate. So there's different time periods.
Okay.
It's different whether it was just a by right building permit, whether there was a special permit attached, whether there was a variance attached, and they all have separate criteria as to the like how long a municipality has to enforce their own regulations.
So even building.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for dimensional setbacks, all these things. So if we don't catch it within a certain period of time and rectify it, it becomes lawful.
Okay.
But the longest time period is 10 years. So
And
that's the
do you
longest
know if
one.
that applies to building as well, or 10 years as it relates to this?
Both.
Oh, to both?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
So if you did something in the 80s, you're grandfathered and it's legal now, whatever you did, even though perhaps when you did it, it was unpermitted, or it was permitted but the records are lost.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't really have like the Dorchester Decker homes. I was just trying to think of like a place that we might run into some type of.
Yeah, we actually, I don't want to, give an address or anything, but we have had this happen. We have had a home that was turned into a 3-family, and we didn't know. And it happened in the 90s. And we only found out about it a year ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When a new neighbor moved in next door and said, what is going on
But how
beside me? I didn't even know that this was
How do you
possible.
know that it was?
They did all unpermitted work. I mean, if no one's
No,
going
but
to.
how do you know when it was done? Can they prove it if it was
They had
unpermitted?
rental listings that went
Rental
back
listings, that's how
decades.
they went back.
Gee, okay.
To show. So it's, they have to prove that they are now vested. So
Yeah, 'cause I always thought that might be hard if you
Yeah.
finish something, like a basement,
yes.
and how do you prove that it was finished for 10 years? So you would need to show some kind of evidence of that. Yeah, okay. Okay. Any other thoughts?
So where did we conclude here?
Well,
With respect to 4134. 4134.
Well, I was just asking before I ask about a conclusion, if there was any other thoughts from anyone on that particular topic, and then we can kind of run through and see what our opinions are individually.
Could we sort of nutshell that one specific topic of what it would look like presented two ways? Am I making sense?
So like if we had it in and we didn't have it in?
Yes. So we would either
think
be
that's it.
presenting, so we're either presenting that there is an option for the second ADU, or we're just not speaking about it at all.
Yeah, so you're either voting to move that forward to just the public hearing, to hear public feedback, and then you would make determination at that time as to whether you wanted to move it forward to the select board for inclusion in the warrant or not. If we were to include it for inclusion in the warrant, I would pull it out as a separate article. I wouldn't keep it within the main article. The main article needs to pass. We don't want to be non-compliant. The second is an opt-in for that section. I would have it as a different warrant article, so it would be voted upon separately at town meeting. They wouldn't be compliant on each other.
So the question is to bring it as a separate warrant or not,
So the question is whether you want to bring it to public hearing or not.
to public hearing?
Yes. If it went past public hearing and remained in the bylaw, I would separate them out.
Okay, and if we don't bring it to public hearing, then it does not go to town meeting?
Correct.
Okay.
I have a question though, just process-wise. If we bring it to the next step, are we able to say, this is not a requirement, it was an option, we're bringing it to you to comment? Our bringing it forward doesn't mean that we're endorsing that should be included? No. Okay.
So if we bring it to public hearing, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to go on the warrant?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you could hear at public hearing, we all love it, and you could still say, you know what, we think it makes the most sense to wait a year, so it's, I mean, I think it might be valuable to hear hear what
And that's just
Community
specific to the 4134 little paragraph here.
yes, yeah. All of the rest needs to be in there, and all of it is just compliant with the state language.
Okay.
So, yeah, and that one is probably the only really part that needs
So
a lot of
Leanne, when
discussion.
when this goes to public hearing, would this be pulled out and put in a separate place because it would be a separate warrant issue?
I can do that if it's cleaner.
I think that would be,
Yep.
I think that would be
You do it ahead
helpful.
of time, yeah.
I thought that's what you were just saying, they put in a
I
separate
would do it
article.
after the public hearing, just for when it goes
okay.
to the select board, so that they see it's 3 zoning articles instead of 2, so they get voted upon separately. But I can do that for the purpose of the public hearing, so that we can have 3 distinct conversations.
And when or if we bring it to public hearing as a planning board, we can share with them our concerns as well, so we can have a conversation with them about it too.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, comments? All right, then I guess I'll start. We can maybe go down and get our thoughts on. So hearing what you just said about not being required to bring it to town meeting and having the public hearing. If we bring it to public hearing, we don't have to bring it to town meeting, and we can share with them our thoughts on it. I'm in favor of keeping it in for public hearing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it would be a beneficial discussion to have at public hearing, but I do like the ability to separate it out so it's not in the same bucket with all of the rest of the articles.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that it's an opt-out, opt-in item. It should be worded that way in a separate conversation. So I'd be in favor of it going in if we can separate it from the rest of this.
I haven't changed my opinion, it should be the public hearing.
I'm in agreement with including it and having it be called out separately.
Okay, perfect.
And honestly, thank you, because you outlining the process for how that discussion would go helped shape, at least my opinion.
Yeah,
So thank
and
you.
next week on Wednesday at 10 a.m., I will be giving a presentation at the Centre for Active Living regarding ADUs. So it was a lot of just inquiries as people wanting to put them in their yards, but I'm going to wrap in all of this fun stuff and alert them to the public hearing. So hopefully we get a good turnout.
Is it 10 or 11?
Whatever I emailed you,
The 11.
then that's
Okay.
probably what it is.
It's at exactly that time.
It's not the first time I've gotten it wrong. But usually whatever I write is correct, yeah.
Okay, yes, you did say 11, on
11,
the 12th at the
on
Center
the
for
12th.
Health.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to thank you too, the whole planning department, for kind of being one wheel down on the vehicle and keeping up with these types of laws that are coming down from the governor.
Thank you.
Because that is not an easy task by any stretch. So we really appreciate.
And you're still smiling.
I love this stuff.
Thank you.
No
Thank
problem.
you both.
And then, actually, there was one, Jeff, you had a question regarding family and bedroom count. It wasn't in here, so I wasn't able to write the question, but I did ask council when I spoke with her. It's not referenced in the statute at all, so we didn't reference it in the ADU bylaw to say 2 persons per bedroom or anything like that. That area is gray. Also, I know the state's been pushing that we don't discuss families in that sense because we don't get to determine what makes up a family. But I understand that sometimes it's nice to have that criteria in there just so you don't have overcrowding of spaces. But a lot of times that's cleaned up within the Department of Health for sanitary living facilities and different requirements. But it's something that we could probably address at another point if we saw it pass with other towns' bylaws.
So that question, when I asked that question, that was with respect to the short-term rentals.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't referenced.
Oh, for the ADU. Okay.
No, it was short-term rentals, and I have seen in short-term rental
Yes.
regulations in other towns that they are addressing
Yes.
the
Number of
bedrooms per
persons.
bedroom.
Yeah. And we can for rentals. Yeah.
You can for rental, right, but the one that we looked at last
Didn't have it included.
does not have it in that.
And then, you didn't seem to have any questions on the merger bylaw changes last time. I don't know if you want to discuss anything related to that. Basically, I know you weren't here, Melissa, so it's just basically that,
I watched on,
oh yeah, that
Yeah.
the merged lots that are over 10,000 square feet now unmerged. They meet certain criteria, and then we're able to institute a single-family residential structure, certain square footage, certain number of bedrooms.
Great, so then that takes care of that agenda item. Everybody's good on that one? Okay, so then we'll move to other matters not reasonably anticipated. All right, and if I can just add one thing, and kind of piggybacking on your thanking the planning board or the planning office, the planning board too. I think that our conversations and sharing each other's opinions and thoughts and listening to one another with a kind tone is conducive to really good